Right then.
That's going back to when the company I was in helped to open a road into Tobruk, much before Alamein.
Yeah.
And we had the Rommel actually overrode the road that we opened up, and the New Zealand division had to retreat.
Yes.
We went back to near Cairo in the finish, and we had to have additional people turned into the company that I was in because of the loss of all our drivers and all our equipment. After that, let me think, we just went on manoeuvres and continued practicing one thing and another. And then we went, the engineering company went and put folding boat bridges over the canal, and we ultimately finished up in Syria, up Aleppo. And this was at this stage, Rommel's people had got well on the way to Cairo.
Okay.
And an alarm came from the New Zealand division to return from Syria to try and stop Rommel's army. It took us 5 days to get from Aleppo to WWII, and everybody else was going back towards Cairo, and we're the only silly ones that were going forwards. Never mind. We were cut down in WWII, at the company I was in. 100 of us and 4 officers were sent further up the coast to Charing Cross. The English had named all sorts of spots after places in England, and Charing Cross was where the Indians were laying out mines, and we had to help them finish the job, and then act as a rear guard to go back and join the rest of the brigade. We did meet up with the brigade on the escarpment ahead of the German army, and we managed to withhold the 90th Light Division, the Panzer Division of tanks,
yep,
and 3 divisions of battalions for a week, which when we escaped, we left at midnight and broke our way through the Germans and headed for Alamein. When we got to Alamein...
Could you maybe tell me some of the, let's say, more specific details about what you were doing personally, for example, at that time? For example, during this...
The major of the section was a brilliant civil engineer. He was a man that knew all the stars, and he was in demand because of his abilities. And I was a driver, one driver, and he had another driver, and we had a Dodge pickup as a vehicle. When we got to Alamein, from breaking out from the Germans, the men that we had 60 men left from the 100, and the authorities further back decided that somebody needed a rest, and the 60 were taken. Unfortunately, if you like to use the expression, I was still, of course, with Major Reid, and he wasn't a major before, he was a captain, but he made into a major, and given control of the 6th Field Engineers. Of course, they were all building placements and one thing or other like that. Then we were sent out into the desert at various spots where it was likely that the Germans could break through, to set mines and that sort of thing. We suffered a bit from shelling, but managed to overcome that sort of thing. The Germans couldn't possibly hope to go further south than Egypt because of the Qattara Depression, which is a base of very soft sand, and you could disappear in it in no time. So there was obviously no chance of the Germans going down into that Qattara Depression, and we were holding them off with mines and whatever. And we had to move to several places, laying mines, which would stop the Germans from invading from the south.
Okay.
It was an onerous job, but when you're young, you do these things, and so we managed to survive. I personally was qualified steel and copper plate engraver for the printing trade, and we had been told that we had to go out and mine a place called A on the map.
Okay.
And the major came storming back into the camp and said, "How on earth are we going to get to A? We've got no direction. It's on the map, but there's no indication of what degree we work from." And because of my qualifications, I said, "Well, you get me some clear plastic and we'll get something that will give you a direction to go by placing it on the map, what degree we'll have to take from here." And I made protractors 180 degrees, and with a scriber I made with a piece of wood and a needle, and coloured the lines with chemical that most of us carried for little saws and all that sort of thing. And then I took it to him and I said, "Here you are, try that." And he took one look at it and disappeared.
Okay.
And then over the next day, I had to make another half dozen because all the officers wanted one of the same things.
Okay.
That was fair enough. And at least it gave us an indication to get to point A. Then from there, after that had been mined and protected, we went into, shall we say, relief positions where there was nothing to worry about. We could have a rest for a while. Alamein became a fully qualified fort line. The Australians out on the coast, various English units between the coast and the New Zealanders who were down south to the southern end of the line. Then came the big, shall we say, preparation for an attack on the German positions. And a section of the company I was in set out to pick up mines prior to the tanks coming in. And I carried the major had said, you better sandbag the Jeep, which I did do, of course. And at night time, we travelled out to see how the section was getting on. And they were, this was in the first barrage that went over. They had discovered that there was a German machine gun directed at a part of where they were picking up mines, so they just altered the position and flagged it. And I took the major up late at night to within, say, 30 yards or 30 metres of where the section was picking up mines. And he got out of the Jeep and walked up to see how they were getting on. And suddenly the front of the Jeep I was driving must have activated a mine that was on a time set, because I'd been parked for just a few minutes when the mine blew up, and it blew the front off the Jeep and me out of the Jeep, wrecked the front of the Jeep, and it was ultimately discovered that it was an English mine, because the Germans had thousands of them. They'd picked them up from where the English companies had retreated, and they may have parked on this mine that had been missed, and it must have had a timer in it, and they parked on the mine, and you're quite all right, and all of a sudden the timer would open up, and that was it. So the major walked back to get a ride in his Jeep, and he discovered me standing alongside it, but phased out and in the front off the Jeep, engine and all. So we walked then back to where the major's other vehicle was, the main vehicle, and I'm a bit foggy what happened to me after that, except that the major went back to where the boys were working on building lines and called up a signal company, Jeep, with radios, and that Jeep with the radio operators on went up to past where I had got going up, and they got all the gear out of the Jeep to communicate load lines, so the major could communicate with headquarters. And a shell from the barrage actually landed in their Jeep, which they were fortunate they got everything out of it, but it was ruined as well with some of our own shells. But however, ultimately that first attack didn't produce any real advance, but produced a further forward position, but not what you would call an final attacking position. And that happened a few days later when the 1,200 guns opened up on the German positions. And as far as I know, as far as I believe, the Australians on the coast may have beaten us by opening up a line into the German camp and forcing them to retreat. I think they beat us by about an hour, but the track that the 8th Field Company made was sufficiently wide and safe enough for the tanks and the infantry to advance. In those days, we always had the story that the engineers were first in and the engineers were last out. That's how it happened. We lifted mines on an advancement and on a retreat we were last laying mines. But that was how it went. And not long after all the British side advanced with the Germans in retreat, it started to rain in the desert. The rain like beer. The trucks got stuck, couldn't move. Finally we got to back up to Mersey and stayed there for a number of days until the rain stopped, and then by this time the Germans of course had retreated further, but the New Zealand division kept attacking, and we were made great use of by the higher authorities, Montgomery, etc., by taking inland routes so that we swung what they called a left hook.
Yeah.
And an endeavour, which we succeeded in sometimes, to get behind the Germans and forcing them to retreat further and further. It's always seemed peculiar to me that we were the ones that were given the job. But we do know that Rommel had already stated that the best division in the army in the desert in northern Africa was the New Zealanders. He also stated that if he had an army composed of New Zealanders, he'd conquer the world.
Okay.
This time he wasn't a well man, and he had a session back in Germany for himself, and because of Ingelkram, where we held him up for a week, he arrived back to take charge, but it was too late. They couldn't advance past Alamein because it had been turned into a fortress. And then the whole thing was that from there on we were used as an attacking force all the time, taking left hooks so that we could get behind the Germans, and we got up to Alamein, which was way up in Libya, and the major was called for from brigade headquarters because of his abilities and his knowing of the stars, and the guys thought they were out of place from the own guy who thought he knew everything, and they were miles away from where they were supposed to be, and so he actually got wounded in action with escaping Germans. And I had to pick him up with the jeep from the rain gun carrier, which is a little tracked open contraption. And he was put into an ambulance and left word for me to get some of these things out of the main vehicle that we were using. The next day, word came that the ambulance that he'd been in to go back to the field hospital had been captured by a German company that we knew as the 90th Light Division and taken up to Tripoli. I was to hand these bits and pieces over the next morning, which obviously wasn't going to happen anyway. But as I was walking towards the second in command of the company, I was suddenly lying flat on the ground, face down, and there was a hole in the ground alongside me where some sort of high explosive had come in and blowing me down. Never found anybody that can tell me if an incoming shell of any type pushes enough air to put you flat on the ground. But that's the only way I can think that it happened. However, I wasn't hurt, fortunately. And I took the stuff down to the 2IC. He accepted them and then found when he went that the 90th Light had been through on that side of us by a few miles, and that Murray had been captured in the ambulance. And I believe the Italian doctors that were in Tripoli in the hospital there couldn't do anything with the arm, so they had amputated. As a side fact, I met him later in New Zealand when after I got married, we had our honeymoon in a place called Alamein, and he was working as the country civil engineer, the community civil engineer, and it was quite funny. He said, "You're coming to my place for dinner tonight." And when we got there, his wife said that she had heard so much about things that I had done as a soldier that she was always wanted to meet me. That's as far as it got anyway. But he had written a book about Alamein itself. And it was called, what was it called?
The Turning Point or something?
Pardon?
The Turning Point or something like that?
Yes, yeah. Have you read it?
No, I haven't read it, no.
Oh. Have you got a copy?
No, because if I had a copy, I would have read it. That's why I didn't read it.
I don't know it's possible to get one or not. I actually have a signed autograph copy myself, which I don't really want to give away.
No, of course not.
You do understand that?
Nowadays with the internet, you can usually find books. If you're looking for them, you can usually find them pretty easily, if they're not too old or too hard to find.
But they're a worthwhile book for you to look at anyway, because it's solely about activities at Alamein.
Okay, and since you were his driver, were you usually involved in the actually laying the mines and those things, or were you more with him most of the time?
drivers, that's your job. You've got to go after the vehicle. My job was, we major had two drivers, one for what we had at the time, a Dodge pickup, and one for the Jeep. But the Jeep was always used for reconnaissance, and most of my life in the Army, I was a reconnaissance driver, which meant going into all sorts of maybe nasty places and beating a retreat from them, whatever. Yeah.
Was it an American Jeep or a British model?
Oh, no, American Jeep.
Okay. And how did you, why were you selected to be an engineer, and why were you selected to be a driver?
Maybe when I volunteered, I had done a couple of years in the territorials down in Dunedin, and I knew in the intelligence department, and I knew that maps were no worry to me. I also knew that I was able to drive with a sun compass, and I also knew that I found out that I never got lost. I could always get back to where I started, and consequently, many times I was asked to lead ration trucks for the company and water trucks to some advanced position that was well away from the fighting sections, but I could get there and I could get back without losing anybody. So that's it. I just stayed on.
Okay. And what were your first impressions when you got to the desert? I mean, temperature-wise, fly-wise, the flies and things like that, compared to New Zealand or what you were used to. What were your first impressions?
When I got back to New Zealand?
No.
When I got to Italy.
When you got to North Africa, what were your first impressions of the environment there compared to back home?
Let's put it was hot as hell. Water was scarce. And there's certainly some fine buildings in Egypt, and but there's also a lot of poor people that work for practically nothing and just staying alive. Of course, it's changed now, to a degree anyway, but yeah, it was other places I would have liked to have lived in.
Okay.
Although, from the first time when we opened the track into Tobruk, we came back to Egypt and we camped out near the pyramids where there was an army camp, and there was also a prisoners camp, and it was pleasant to hear the Italians singing at night time. So we're happy to be out of the war anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
Wars a war, whatever you do.
You mentioned before that you had a good sense of direction. So how would you, when you were in the desert, for example, driving, how would you know if an area would be mined or not mined, if it was dangerous, things like that?
Well, the worst way to find a mine is to get blown up. But the area where resources and rations and all that sort of stuff was kept was always behind the advanced units, and presumably it was sitting in a safe site. So those sort of things were never really attacked, because as far as the Germans own equipment was concerned, they had lost so much as they retreated that I suppose they were relying on stuff that they'd run in the first place. So they were using a lot of English trucks and things like that they'd captured.
And you said before that the mine that your own Jeep blew up on was a British mine. How did you find out it was a British? Once it had blown up, I mean.
Bits and pieces.
From the small fragments.
The general impression was that had it been a German mine, I wouldn't have been alive.
Okay. It would have been more powerful if it was a German one.
Yes.
Okay.
They were a wee bit bigger.
And you said you also found some fragments of the mine, though, that helped you identify it.
Pardon?
You said you also found the pieces of the mine.
Yeah.
When you saw it was British that way.
Pieces of the little bits of the case of the mine, but they were able to say, yeah, it's a British mine, not a German-made mine, which was fortunate for me, I suppose.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And were you usually well fed, and did you have enough water when you were in the desert, or were there times when the supplies would stop coming?
The thing that the forces did the very best they could to keep the water trucks full of water by going back to where a water point would be established. There were in various places wells in the desert where there was water in them, but you had to be pretty sure that the water was all right before you tried to take it, because they had all sorts of peculiar stuff in it. It was usually down 6 to 8 feet below the surface, these wells. I've been down in one or two of them, and you would have a wash, but you wouldn't be drinking it.
Okay. And
there is a, for want of a better word, snail in the waters that leaves some sort of poisonous stuff in its trail, and so you didn't handle that, you kept well away from it. I think they existed in the Nile River as well, even around Cairo itself, because they were warned never to go into the water.
Okay, and what was daily life like, let's say, on the front when no battles were occurring? You know, would you have to stay in a foxhole the whole day, or what was that like?
Well, the engineers, we moved around. We weren't like infantry, which stayed on one spot. Ordered to move, but our job was to fix up things as they go along, and such as damaged German guns and things like that, and Italian guns in the desert. We used to go and blow the barrel of the gun with a charge so it could never be used again. But of course, we destroyed anything that didn't belong to us, shall we say.
Okay. So you were kept more active than the infantry during calm periods?
Yeah. Engineers were on the move all the time. whether it's laying mines, whether it's picking up mines, whether it's doing a bit of excavation for infantry positions, or excavation for a gun position. It's on all the time.
So how would you, for example, if you were preparing a gun position, how would you do the excavation? Did you have special tools that the infantry or artillery didn't have?
Yeah, we had, we could call up diggers if we wanted a bit decent sort of excavation, or just put on a gang of engineers and they had to dig it by hand.
Okay.
The desert is a funny place. It's sand, but there's also a lot of stones, rocks, and chips, and this, that, and the other stuff. So it can be quite hard to get down below. It's hard enough in some places to, instead of having a foot trench, you have to build a sanger. Scoop out the sand as much as you could and put stones all around yourself so that you could get in it and get some sort of protection.
Yeah, if you go around the desert there today, you can still find sangers pretty much anywhere you go over there, You have some that are made of stones, and then I saw you have some that are made with gasoline tins that were probably filled with sand at the time, I would suspect.
Yeah.
So now they're all rusty, but if you look at the sand, you can still see the square shapes from the rust.
Yes. You've been to Alamein?
Yeah, I went there quite a few times. I was there again just a few months ago.
Yeah. I didn't get to Alamein at this time, actually. I was in Port Chalmers, which is in the Dunedin Harbour, and I had a fall onto the gutter and the Carseal Road, and some people handy managed to pick me up, and eventually I was taken to a hospital in the ambulance, and I had the humerus, I don't know whether that's the cup or the ball that puts it, but the ball on the top of the arm had actually broken the cup, and it had to heal, and they said these are the only bones in the body that grow. No other bone will grow. So that took a bit of a while before these bits and pieces grew back again. But however, that's life. I'm well on my way to 95, so I don't know how long that lasts.
That's not a question I can answer anyway.
Yeah.
And what were your opinions about the various Allied forces, the British, the Indians, the Australians, the French who were at Alamein? Did you have, some had a better reputation, some had a less good reputation?
Yeah. I shouldn't say this, I don't repeat it. I didn't have much time for the British.
Okay.
We called up in several times. Our commander had called for tanks to advance, and they wouldn't. And they wouldn't move until somebody in their own tank company told them to. And then they didn't always move either, because the officers should direct them when they asked. Wouldn't do it. It's not the sort of thing that you want to make public, I don't think.
And what about the Australians? They're famous for being pretty good, but it's also famous that sometimes there was brawls with New Zealand soldiers.
We have had all through the Desert War, taken positions from the Germans, and they were replaced, or rather, the New Zealand division people were pulled out and an English division put in place. And they'd always lose that area that we had, and we had to go back and take it again. And
Okay.
that really got up the infantry noses.
Okay. And
This, I suppose, but that's just exactly how it was.
and did you ever encounter the Free French force that was in Alamein? Were you ever working with them or anything?
No, we were never that close to them. The engineers as a body weren't that close to them, but the division had met with some of the head French that had been further south in Sahara and that sort of area. And when their officers said that they were cutting their arrangements with the French government, and they were coming to join us when the Desert War. They were pretty good fighting outfit, apparently.
And what about the Germans and Italians? Obviously the Germans were quite well respected, but the Italians a bit less, or how was that at the time?
The Italians were glad to get captured.
Okay.
They were going to be in a prison camp somewhere, but they weren't being in the war. When we got to Italy, the Italians knew most of us, about us, and we were always welcomed by the local population.
And what about the Germans? When the division got to Egypt and was first fighting against the Germans, did you learn any tricks from them? I mean, engineering tricks about mines, all that, since they had been in combat for longer than you?
We've been pretty well trained back in New Zealand with laying mines and picking them up and folding boat bridges and drilling for water and whatever.
Okay. And in the battles you were mentioning to me before, were any of your close friends, except the major, captured or killed or wounded? Any of the people that you remember specifically?
Would you repeat that, please?
Yeah, in the battles that you mentioned, did you have any of your personal close friends who got captured or severely wounded or killed in North Africa?
Yes, we had, when we were recalled from Syria, we lost 40 men out of 100 that we left in Mozambique. In Minkle we lost men. But the engineer companies, I was in a headquarters company, and there were 3 sections in the company. And you don't really sort of see much about the other blokes. You know, all the guys in your own part in the headquarters section. But you only knew the odd 1 or 2 because we didn't see each other very much. It was every engineer truck had to be able to survive itself with food and water, because that's how we worked. We sent a truckload of men to do a job, and they had to be able to exist away from us.
Killed killed or wounded or captured at Alamein, for example, or in the specific group that you were with?
I can't recall any immediate deaths. But
okay. And
once again, I return to the fact that in the engineers, you were a little group on your own.
yeah.
I was in a little group with 2 or 3 different majors, but most of the time with Major Reed. And the other driver, we had to cook our own food and make our own holes in the ground, slip trenches or whatever you like to call them. Because we always had the big one for a major as well. He was a very busy bloke. And he knew most of the other cars, of course, because they were under his command. And the men and the trucks were under the command of their officers. He did what they were asked to do.
Okay. And you said earlier on, when the major was captured, I didn't hear what you said. He got a limb amputated. You said his arm was amputated by the Italian doctors?
The Italians?
You said that when the major was captured, the Italian doctors had to amputate him.
Yes. The brigade that I was in, and the engineer company that was in that brigade, we were packed overnight in between the sand hills, more than the sand hills, of course, and the 90th Light Division, which had been a division of Germans that had, shall we say, several times met with the New Zealand soldiers in battle. And just as an aside, the 90th Light Division at the finish of the African campaign, the 90th Light wouldn't surrender to anyone but the New Zealanders. They said they'd go on fighting unless they were allowed to surrender to the New Zealand company. And of course that took place anyway. But the hospital that Murray was supposed to arrive at was something like 30 miles away. And the 90th Light escaped between us, where we were, and the hospital where it was away 30, 40 miles away. And the Murray was picked up by an ambulance at night, and they headed towards, incidentally, the ambulances that we experienced, most of them were driven by American volunteers, and they were proceeding towards the main frontline hospital when the 90th Light went through and just took them in as well, captured the ambulance, and they dropped them off at Tripoli. And the only doctors were in the hospital that had been used by the Germans and Italians, and they couldn't do anything with the remains of the arm other than actually take it off below the shoulder.
And how had he been wounded? By a shell?
Pardon?
How had he been wounded? By a shell?
I don't know. It must have been. he had gone to the head of the brigade that we were in, towards the coast, and the theoretical engineer or whatever he was that was supposed to put the brigade where they wanted to be was well out. And that was the first, according to what I heard after, was the first thing that he said was, "You're miles away from where you ought to be." He knew all the stars, and he was very sure that they weren't where they were supposed to be. And apparently there was some fighting going on between the division and at that stage and the German troops escaping, and he was unlucky. And as I said, a tracked vehicle, burn gun carrier, we call them, they were open. There was no leak or anything on them. Brought him far enough up for me to pick him up and bring him back where the ambulance could pick him up. And that happened.
And something completely unrelated. When I visit Alamein and go around in the desert, there's always lots of pieces of broken bottles from the war, you know? And lots of them are whiskey bottles, beer bottles, things like that. Did you guys have a daily ration of alcohol or something like that? Or
No.
Not at all?
Of course, that's many years ago, of course, and there's been lots of people visit, and probably the Arabs themselves, the desert people.
No, that's the interesting thing. See, they don't actually drink alcohol, or at least they don't theoretically because they're Muslims. And these bottles that I find, I always look at them. They say, you know, made in Canada, made in New Zealand, Christchurch, and they have dates, sometimes 1942, 1943. So they're really from the war. They're not modern bottles, you know?
I'll tell you a funny thing. If we happen to be travelling, say, past a railway station or something like that, not exposed to the war at that moment, there'd always be Arab teenagers or older and younger with alcohol for sale. But then we discovered that the bottles had a hole drilled in the bottom of them, and all the alcohol drained out, and the hole blocked up and filled with water.
Okay.
So you paid for a bottle of whiskey that was actually a bottle of water.
Well, a bottle of water might be more useful in the desert anyways, if you're really thirsty.
More use. Yeah.
Okay, and would you maybe have any other people, veterans like you who were in Egypt, who could still be alive today that you might... originally established for the First World War by returned soldiers. It's no longer in existence, so this was the one that was rebuilt a few years ago, over 10 years ago. Why did you volunteer at the time?
Well,
what were your personal motivations for that?
Hitler started showing his right round, of course, and